Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Mr. Mom's World Speaks, where we are home to food, family, friends, fun, and for two-legged, four-legged, we don't care which order that is. We always like to have fun here at Mr. Mom's World. My guest today is someone that I have met on Facebook with his product, and his product being his book. It piqued my interest right off the bat for several reasons. A, everyone knows that I have 10 kids, 8 of them that have come from care. My husband and I have adopted those 8 kids. I used to work in the industry, the foster care industry, on another level from support and advocacy. And what I noticed was lots of the word anxiety living in kids of care. Now, I'm sure we can all imagine why. But what really intrigued me was this book on anxiety, and reading his beginning bio. Dr. Russell, of course, he's a good guy just because his name is Russell. Dr. Russell Kennedy, his bio was that he had lived with anxiety for many years and then has developed and wrote about it in this new book. Welcome, Dr. Kennedy. So glad you could join me today. Hey, give us a little bit of your history and why you wrote this book.
Well, I grew up with a father with schizophrenia. So, and he had bipolar as well. So it was pretty chaotic around the household. It wasn't always chaotic. I mean, he wasn't always off the rails, but sometimes he was. And I think my system never really got a chance to just sort of settle in and be cared for. So as a result, I developed this sort of alarm state in my body that I kind of manufactured into a worry state in my mind, because that's basically what happens when you've got this alarm in your body that's unresolved. Your mind has to make sense of that feeling. So it usually makes sense of it by thinking things that are terrible and scary, and which of course creates more alarm in your system, which creates more thoughts. And that's the whole premise of the book, is that anxiety really isn't anxiety of the mind at all. It's more of a stored trauma energy in the body that gets reflected by the mind. And, I know as a medical doctor, that sounds odd because, usually we reduce things as medical doctors. We reduce things into symptoms, and we see the symptoms of the mind, and we assume that the mind is the cause, when actually my premise is that the mind is just a reflector of what this unresolved stored energy in the body. And then because the mind creates these, horrible stories, our alarm just gets worse and never really gets a chance to heal. So we never really, with talk therapy or anything like that, we never really get a chance to heal the underlying problem. And the way I often say is it's like when you have a hole in your boat and the boat's filling up with water, you can bail water out of your boat, which is kind of what talk therapy does. And it does help. But really, to fix it, you have to go in and fix the underlying hole in the hull. You have to go down there and really excavate out that alarm that's held in your body, and then you can kind of fix the anxiety. Just fixes itself.
So I know you've stated again in reading a little bit of your initial bio that you don't like the word anxiety. What's that about?
Well, again, it's what I was saying, is that I don't think anxiety really gets to the core of what the problem is. Because, if you have lunch with a friend and you say, I'm feeling really anxious today, they may have no idea, if they don't have anxiety themselves or haven't experienced it, they have no idea what you're talking about. But if you say, I'm feeling really alarmed today, everybody's been alarmed. Everybody's faced something that's been alarming in their lives, and they can kind of relate to that feeling, because that's what the feeling is. It's a feeling of alarm, and words have consciousness to them. Anxiety is sort of this, airy-fairy kind of word. It doesn't have a whole lot of substance to it, but alarm certainly does. So anxiety is what we've, called it in society, but really it's a state of alarm. And that's why I like using alarm rather than the term anxiety.
And do you feel that we're kind of overusing it now? Like, because here's my thought process. Again, I'm living right now in the world of 4 teenagers. And
Right.
so I hear these school counselors constantly talking about anxiety. And my thought process is, listen, we didn't hear about the anxiety, in my day going to high school. It was like when you were asked to get up on stage, you had butterflies. When you had, you know what I mean? Like there was just so I guess, is it a word that you think we're overusing, or maybe just not directing to what it really should be, which would be the word alarm?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like the word in general because, like I said, it doesn't have a whole lot of consciousness to it. I mean, I think I prefer, generalized alarm disorder, social alarm disorder, rather than social anxiety disorder, because that's what it is. It's a state of alarm in your system. And, and I think that's why people have such a hard time with the word anxiety, because it doesn't really resonate for what it actually is.
Right.
Anxiety is just this, what I call anxiety is just the thought process of the mind. It's not actually painful. What's painful is the alarm sensation in the body. That's what we have to work on. So, yeah, I mean, I think in a way it's overused just because I think it's a misnomer to start with. But I think there is just a tremendous amount of mental angst in the world, and that's the word that most people use to associate with it.
And so when you see it in kids, so again, lots of kids in my house. I have 2 kids living with autism that are 8 and 9.
Right.
How do we start teaching our younger kids about alarm? How do we start navigating the course with them so that when they become teenagers, they are fully equipped, if that be the word, to kind of recognize what those triggers are, those alarms are within them? How do we do that?
Well, with younger kids, I'm not an expert in kids, but I have taken a lot of developmental psychology stuff through the Neufeld Institute in Vancouver.
Right.
And I think it's just making them aware of where they feel it in their body. If they're stressed out or whatever, if they get a chance to sort of settle them down. I know sometimes with autism and ADHD stuff, it's hard, but it's just like, where do you feel that? Like, when you feel, when mom is upset or, you haven't eaten or whatever, where do you feel that in your body? Can you find it? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times, we address the mind, and the mind for the kids is really, they don't distinguish between themselves and their mind. They don't know a difference between the two of them. But if you start directing them into their body, like what do you have, butterflies in your stomach? Like you said, right. You have that feeling. Where is that feeling in your body? And then, get them to put their hands on it. Then if you have an invitation, of course, put the hand on top of that hand, and then have them put their other hand on top. And then you kind of like do the dog pile thing with your hand, and just let them know that they're felt, they're seen, heard, and loved. Right. Because that's all any of us want as human beings, to be seen, heard, and loved. And I think talking to them, of course, eye contact, tone of voice, prosody of voice, body language, all that stuff is important too. But it's really getting them to find the area in their body that they feel that discomfort with, and getting them to connect with that. Because words alone won't do it. It really is this sort of whole body. The face is the only place in the human body where the skin is attached directly to the muscles, because that's how we express emotion to each other. Yeah. And I think a lot of the thing with what we're coming up with kids now is the screens. They're on their screens, and they're not getting this human face-to-face interaction anymore. They're not maturing what I call what is called the social engagement system of the brain and the body, that allows that system to soothe other people and soothe ourselves within ourselves. So when we lose connection to our bodies, we lose connection to the ability to soothe ourselves.
Right. So again, going back to my teenagers quickly, in working with teenagers, again, throughout the fostering system and other organizations that I've worked with as well, how do you see them coming into care correlating with, again, overuse of the word, with creating that anxiety within them?
Well, I mean, I think the kids that come into care, didn't get that secure attachment, so they never really got a chance to put themselves first. And a lot of us with trauma, especially, with my dad, I never really put myself first. I put him first. I put my mother first. And, you become an empath because you get very good at reading other people and putting other people first. But that only works for so long. And,
Right.
Your soul starts to rot at that point. You start to get this alarm build up in your system, which is basically your own self asking for your own attention.
Right.
And I don't think these kids have ever really learned how to give themselves attention. And, it kind of reminds me of that statement is like when you abuse or abandon a child, the child doesn't stop loving the parent. They stop loving themselves. Right.
Right.
So that internal split is what sets the state for alarm being pushed into the system, and then the anxiety, the thoughts that come from that, and then it just becomes a self-reinforcing prophecy. The alarm creates the anxiety, and the anxiety creates the alarm. So when I see kids in care, I see a kid who never got a chance to put themselves first, and they don't know how to put themselves first. And to put yourself first, you really have to get in tune with your needs. What's in your body. I see a lot of kids, and you probably run into this, that don't know they're hungry until they're starving, that don't know they have to go to the bathroom until they absolutely have to go, that wet the bed because they're not aware of their own bodies. They've dissociated out of their own bodies and, lived in this sort of neck up environment that they have to control the world in. And it's showing them that it's okay to go back into their body. And that takes a while, that takes some presence. And that's a lot of, healing from anxiety is learning how to go back into that body, because when you store this trauma in your body, you don't want to go back down there. So it's easier in quotation marks, to live in your head, because when you live in your head, you don't have to go back into feeling town, which is where all the pain is.
Right. And so how do we start that process? Now, again, as any caregiver, you receive a child, maybe 10, 11 years old. How do we start that process, not only with kids, but with ourselves?
Well, I think it's just finding, when you're alarmed, when you're stressed, asking yourself, where do I feel this in my body, rather than trying to figure it out up here, because you'll never figure it out up here.
But sorry to interrupt you. So as someone who used to suffer stage fright, I didn't really recognize that that's what it was. I thought I was this outspoken blah, blah, blah. I could get up and say anything in front of anybody.
Right.
And then you get there and you can't, or you screw up, so to speak.
Yeah.
How do you recognize those things? And as an adult, it's maybe a little bit easier, but certainly as a teenager, you're kind of going like, well, what the hell? Where's that from? What's going on in there? And do you even recognize it as something going on?
Yeah, I think we're trapped in our heads so much that we don't even see it. It's like the old saying, you can't see the label from inside the bottle.
Right.
And that's what people do. We assume our mind is us. We assume that the limits of our abilities are the limits of our mind. And, that's a convenient way to think about it when you are afraid to go into your body, because if you're afraid to go into your body, the only place you can live is your mind. So I think it's really training people, what's going on in your body? What do you feel right now? Bringing people into sensation, because that brings you into the present moment.
Right.
The thoughts are always about the future. That's the thing about anxieties. It's always about the future. And when you can bring yourself into sensation, you can only sense things in the present moment. I can't sense that I have to go to the bathroom at 3:00 tomorrow afternoon. Like, I sense things in the moment. Right. So sometimes I get people to, put your fingers on your face, cross your hands over the midline and rub your cheeks. Now, we have COVID now, so you have to make sure your hands are washed and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you do that, if you look at the neuroscience of the brain, how much of the brain architecture is devoted to your hands and your face. Now, as soon as you put your hands on your face, both hands on your face, and you rub like that, it overwhelms your brain and brings you into the present moment. Essential oils are good for that too, but basically what I'm trying to get people to do is get into sensation, because sensation will bring you into the moment. Your brain will always try and think of the future, but sensation, you have to sense in the moment. And the more you get used to sensing in the moment, the more you can ground yourself. And the more you ground yourself, the less anxious you're going to be.
So do you feel that okay, let's speak from a parental place right now. So do you think as the parent to, say, my teenagers, I'm going to come to them and say, listen, I just want to try some new stuff on you. I want to be able to see if we can figure this out together. Do you think that I should be saying, hey, let's try to feel this, touch this? You tell me when you're starting to feel whatever it is, upset stomach, just so that you can slowly start to identify it. But then is it, as a parent, is that appropriate, I guess? Not appropriate, but is it going to be the better way, or do we train them on individually to do it themselves? Does that make sense?
Well, I think you need to show them first. You need to show them where they feel something in their body. Like sometimes I'll get people to bring up a trauma or bring up something that stresses them out, and then say, okay, where do you feel that? And almost always it's somewhere between their chin and your pubic bone. It's usually in the midline. It's usually around the heart space, but I've seen a lot of people in the throat, a lot of people who can't say something to someone. They need to say, like, especially to a parent, they get a lot of this blockage in the throat, this alarm sensation in the throat. The lower down, sexual abuse, physical abuse, that kind of stuff. It's sort of in the middle of the belly kind of thing. Abandonment, it's often in the heart. It's just getting them really in tune with where they feel it, because often what I'll get people to do is say, where is that in your body? Does it have a clear border to it? Like, how big is it? And some people say, yeah, it's like a fist, and it pushes up on my heart, and it's kind of like it's spiky, it's hot, and just really get them to describe it in as many ways as they can. And I'll say, okay, that is your alarm. When you get that, is what you need to focus on, not going up into your head and going, how do I figure this out? Because you'll never figure it out in your head. You have to really connect with that part of you that's alarmed, and put your hand over it. You can even talk to it, even though it sounds weird. It's like, look, I know you're upset right now, but I've got you. You put your hand over it, you can kind of rub the area. It's just a matter of connecting in sensation more than anything else, because that's where you'll learn how to ground yourself. If you don't ground yourself, you'll never recover from anxiety. You need that grounding in your body. You need to make friends with that place. And a lot of times I think that place in adults that gets flared up with our alarm is our younger selves. It's our younger selves asking for our attention. And in a way, they're kind of, standing there with their hands up to us, like they want us to pick them up. And and we're distracting, into the computer or, other things. And, if you have a child in front of you that's holding up their hands to be held, and you distract into something else, that child is either going to give up, which sometimes they do, or they're just going to get louder, and the alarm is going to get more and more intense. So it's realizing that a lot of that alarm that you feel in your body is your younger self asking for your attention.
Mm-hmm. And so, I already know the answer to this, but I'm hoping that you will give probably a much more detailed answer, and certainly one far wiser than mine. How do we correlate the stress/anxiety with illnesses?
Well, over time, when you run that much catecholamines, when you run that much adrenaline and that much cortisol in the system, after a while, the system starts to break down. So I think that's why we wind up seeing, people getting sick in their, 30s, 40s, 50s, with, older people diseases, arthritis, all this kind of thing. So it's a matter of sort of seeing that alarm does create long-term health problems if you don't deal with it and rectify it and learn how to connect with it. And I think that's a lot of where addiction comes from. Addiction is allowing yourself some pleasure that you typically don't allow yourself to have. So if you don't allow yourself to feel good because of what feeling good meant for you when you were a child, you're destined to be ill. You're destined to be unwell because you don't allow yourself the positive side of life.
Right.
In trying to restrict the negative.
So how would that play out in kids? Because again, having those kids coming in from care at a variety of ages, from 3 months to 10 years old, we've had them come into our home. How does that play out in kids? Because we have kids with tummy aches, we have kids that constantly get headaches. Is that typically triggers to something else, or symptoms of something else?
Yeah, it's a symptom of not feeling connected to themselves. So the alarm increases. The stomach pain in children, especially children, who come into care, is massive.
Right.
It's like 80% of kids who come into care have some gut issues, which
Mhm.
makes sense, because it's the autonomic nervous system and the adrenaline is running all the time. So of course the gut's going to get affected by that. So yeah, it's the system is all affected by this, stored, trapped trauma in their system. And the
Right.
trauma doesn't even have to be from this life. I know this sounds kind of airy fairy and things, but my friend Mark Willin wrote a book called "It Didn't Start with You," which
Yeah.
is all about inherited family trauma. And it's about a lot of the work is with Holocaust survivors, like the children of Holocaust survivors have these incredibly high stress levels when they were, born in North America, a lot of them, and
Right.
generally didn't have a very stressful upbringing. So there's messenger RNA, non-coding RNA that is thought to sort of almost code for trauma and allow that to go into future generations without those generations actually being abused, abandoned, neglected, that kind of, they carry that with them. And some kids are just sensitive. I was a sensitive kid, and I think that's what happens is some kids are just sensitive. And if you get a sensitive kid in a loving environment, you're probably okay. If you get a sensitive kid in a damaging environment, you're asking for trouble, as you
Right.
well know.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of carry on that line, have you had the opportunity to work much with the school system?
Not at all.
None at
Not
all.
at all. Really.
Um,
In the last, I retired from allopathic medicine in officially in 2017, and I sort of buried my head. I've gone underground. It took me a long time to kind of write this book to get
yeah,
it all set. And my wife comes in and she says, I basically live in my bed writing on my laptop, and that's what I've been doing for the last like 2.5 years.
right.
And I've been working on this book for 15 years, but it really didn't come together until like the last, few years. So it's a matter of just being able to be present and see how I can help other people. And I haven't really been involved with the school system. I mean, I've just sort of released this book into the world, and I'm kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. I think it's entertaining. I was a stand-up comic for more than 10 years. So I think it's entertaining, as well as it's got a lot of my own story in it and a lot of the stories of my patients. So I remember reading a book years ago about this woman, and she described anxiety. And I thought, man, this would be such a perfect book if she could say, this is what my anxiety was, this is what it came from, and this is what I can do about it, which is basically what I did in this book. So it's kind of got a lot of stories that makes people feel like normal to have
Right.
anxiety, because it is normal to have anxiety. Krishnamurti has that quote that says, it's no measure of health to be profoundly adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Right.
So, it's a matter of, just normalizing anxiety, alarm, whatever you want to call it, and allowing people to kind of see themselves through this book and, having a laugh too, and just sort of seeing the ridiculous ends that we go to as anxiety sufferers or alarm sufferers and how we convince our minds of things that just aren't true.
Right. So let's dive into that. Let's dive into your book. I understand, and I've read a couple different placements on online. There's been a couple great reviews on your book. I can't quote the person right now, but I will. I could on the second show. And so, where does that take you? Where does that go next?
At this point, Russell, I don't know. I basically this has been kind of my life. It's kind of my life's purpose.
Yeah.
And my life's passion to, I know that I was given a pretty anxious life, or a pretty anxious body to live in. And I've also known that a number of different therapies that I've tried, probably, I would say I've seen probably 50 different therapists, ranging from, hardcore psychiatrists to, Indian shaman energy healers. And it's kind of, it's my purpose in life to be able to translate all those therapies into what actually really worked. And what actually really worked for me may not work for everyone, but I think it will. I think it really, and it did take me a trip on LSD to really figure out this alarm anxiety cycle that I've come up with. that it's just a sense of alarm. I mean, I clearly saw that my alarm, my anxiety, what it told me at the time was this alarm that's locked in my solar plexus. And that's what I needed to treat in order to recover from it. And that's basically what it comes down to. So the book is all about really reconnecting with yourself. I mean, I do put a fair amount of science, about neuroscience in it too. Because people with anxiety they're confused as to what's going on in their mind and body. They don't know. So I explain exactly what's going on in your mind, exactly what's going on in your body, exactly how they link up together, and exactly how to break that cycle. Because until you understand what's going on, you can't fix something that you don't know the cause of.
Right. And so again, book number 2, is there a sequel? And the reason I'm asking so quickly is because it seems that this is an ever-ending topic, anxiety, if you will. And so is it something that you're currently already trying to build within this period? Because you're fresh off the press, so to speak, even though it's been 15 years in the making. But there's got to be lots of stuff that, for lack of a better word, is on the cutting room floor.
There is, yeah. Like the book wound up being about 130,000 words, and at one point it was close to 300,000. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and I think I'm going to take a break for a while because I'm exhausted right now, like finishing the writing and the editing and all the stuff that's come out. But, the idea that I have is to do kind of the next thing might be a younger self workbook, basically just really learning how to connect with your younger self, because that's where all the trauma, that's where it's all held, and it's still in your body. If you didn't have a secure attached parent to kind of help you metabolize and work through it, it's still in there. Mm-hmm. And unless you clear that, it's always going to bother you. It's always going to be a problem in your life. So the next little book that I have in the inkling of my mind is more of a workbook. This was a book. This is something you read. Sure. I don't have a lot of, I've read anxiety books before, and they have a page where you write down the worst feelings that you have. It's none of that. It's basically entertainment and information. The next one may be something along the lines of, okay, here's how to find the alarm in your system. I talk about that a little bit in the book. Here's how to find the alarm in the system, which is actually your younger self asking for your attention. And here's how to connect with it. Because until you connect with that younger self, and become quote unquote whole, there's no healing. Like there's no possibility that you're going to get past anxiety if you can't connect to yourself, because all anxiety is separation anxiety. Gordon Neufeld talks about that. Right, and I say all alarm is separation alarm. So and it's separation from other people, and it's also separation from yourself as well. So that's probably the biggest thing, is that your relationship with other people can be no better than your relationship with yourself. Right. And vice versa. Your relationship with yourself can't be any greater than your relationship with other people. So when you learn how to connect with yourself and truly connect with yourself and accept yourself, and really, and it's not even accepting, it's embracing, what shames you, embracing what you blame yourself about, embracing, what you see as a shortcoming in your life, embracing what you see as a failure, and just seeing, Kyle Cease talks about that, the transformational speaker. He was a comedian for a long time, but he's a brilliant transformational speaker. And he talks about saying something that you don't like about yourself, and then adding at the end of it, go, you know what? I'm a real procrastinator, and I love that about myself. And and you say whatever, blame or shame yourself about, and then at the end of it, you add, and I love that about myself, and I love that. Actually, because it does make you look at things in a very different way. Because if you go down the same track over and over and over, you're making a groove in your mind and your body to go down that same track more and more. And one of the tenets of neuroscience is whatever you focus on, you get more of. Right. So if you focus on your anxiety thoughts, you're going to get more anxiety thoughts. Yeah. So I think it's really, the next book is probably going to be something along the lines of, it's going to be more like a workbook, an experiential kind of like, how do I get in to and feel my body? Something akin to John Bradshaw, back in the 90s when he talked about connecting with your younger self. But a little more fun and a lot more just sort of expansive. Because it really is about connecting with yourself. If you don't connect with yourself, you're going to be anxious for the rest of your life.
Exactly. Tell us how we get your book. Young
It's
fella.
on Amazon. So it's on Amazon.com. It's on Amazon.ca. You can Google Anxiety RX, or you can Google Russell Kennedy, 2 S's, 2 L's, 2 N's, and it'll pop up there. It's available on Kindle. It's available on paperback. I'm working on the audio version now because I love audiobooks myself. So I'm working on that right now, and it's trying to, just get the message out to as many people as possible, because this is a very atypical way of looking at anxiety, very different than most psychologists and psychiatrists. My wife is a somatic experiencing practitioner. She's a somatic trauma therapist. So she and I kind of, collaborate behind the scenes as to what is actually the best way of connecting with your body. So that's where to get the book, and I hope it changes people's lives, and I hope it changes the direction of therapy that we're going in, because talk therapy alone is not enough.
Right. Well, I'm ordering one for each of my teenagers for sure, because I think that it's extremely important that I had someone once tell me, just quickly before we go, I had someone once tell me about an FAS child. Have you told them they have FAS? And I went, no. And when I told them, it opened up the world for them, because then they began to understand. So I think this book for my teenagers is going to be extremely beneficial. And I am so honored that you decided to drop in for us. I wish you the most success possible. And thank you so much for what you're doing and continue to do. And I hope that you will join us again on another show.
I absolutely will. Thank you for doing what you're doing with kids. It's the toughest job in the world, but the most rewarding.
It is. Thank you. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy.
You're welcome.